Alright, so here I want to show some things about why I have trouble with the Indo-European hypothesis. So one of the things is you can kind of see just by looking at this that if you draw a line through each branch, try to find a common point where they all meet up, the region that should be roughly the origin point for all of them is right here, modern-day Turkey. And historically, the first attested Indo-European language ever is Hittite, which is from, guess where? Right about here. Right about in this area. So, just right off the bat, all of the branches point to this spot, and hey, that's the spot where we first find anything. But the Proto-Indo-European is most commonly alleged to be from up here, which is actually the region of the planet that has the lowest diversity of Indo-European languages, native Indo-European languages, right? Because this is just Russian and Ukrainian, which are nearly identical to each other. There's differences for sure, but the Pontic steppe here has basically no diversity of Indo-European languages. Extremely low diversity of Indo-European languages. The diversity is down here. The high diversity is down here. Okay, let's zoom in a little bit here. So, yeah, this whole big swatch right here is just Russian. You're going to have Ukrainian, Belarusian, Polish. So, very low diversity here. Those languages are all very similar to each other. I'll get to the Baltic languages maybe in this video, maybe in another video, but I have issues with the Baltic languages as well, so Lithuanian, Latvian. Here you have its own branch, Armenian. Here you have the Indo-Aryan languages, which are going to include things like Iranian, Persian. Over here in India, you're going to get languages like Hindi, Sanskrit, those kinds of things. Here you have Greek, and this map is strange to me because up until at least about, well, World War I, really, this region had a lot of Greek speakers. This kind of a slice right here where Cappadocia is was just full of Greek speakers. So it's interesting to me that there's a big hole here because there kind of really shouldn't be. Here you have Albanian. The green is all Slavic languages, and the peak diversity for Slavic languages is actually down here. So where we have kind of the peak diversity of Indo-European in Europe anyway is also where you have the peak diversity of Slavic, right down in here. These brown ones are going to be Italic languages, for all of the extant ones of which are Romance languages. And red over here is Germanic, and this little blotchy orange dude, that's going to be the extant Celtic languages. Now, notably, if you look at historical records, claims are that the Celtic languages actually spread from this area across north of the Alps in this region here. And then later on, at some point, Germanic tribes were discovered by the Romans. But the actual first documented examples that we have of Germanic are from over here in what is now modern day Romania. And the sample that we have of this is from Ulfilas, who was born of Cappadocian Greek parents that were captured as slaves by these Goths. And this was like 300 AD, right? So this is, Christianity is well established at this point. This is late. And this is our first actually attested Germanic language of any kind. Similarly, Armenian is first attested in about 500, in the 500s AD. Right, so similar time periods. It's maybe a century later that Armenian is first attested in writing. Slavic is first attested in writing at a similar period. Albanian is much later than that even. Greek we have back to like the really late Bronze Age with Linear B. You have Greek, but Linear A, which is also from this region, was not Greek. It was definitely not Greek. So there's some evidence that what happened was Greek actually supplanted what was happening here, or mixed with what was happening here, and possibly the Greek branch is something like a Creole or something like that. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other on that one, but Linear A is absolutely not Greek. Linear B is definitely Greek, so and that's interesting. And Greek was also spoken here. The stories of the Trojan War are actually about Greeks fighting between these two areas during the Bronze Age collapse period. So that's actually what this is about. Like Troy was over here somewhere, right? So, but notably, kind of the old school claims are that Indo-European originates from this area, and it's spread culturally and linguistically down this way and down this way. But that doesn't make any sense. So if we look at Germanic, for instance, the languages here, Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish, they're so extremely similar to each other that if you speak one, you can understand the others pretty easily. In a sense, it's almost like it's just one language with like different dialects. Right? And Icelandic is related to that group, obviously. So there's very low diversity here, and these cultures are, compared to like the Sami, who are native to this region, or much more native to this region, they've been here a lot longer for sure. They are culturally and technologically relatively ill-equipped for the climate here, which is why they're kind of centered in the south, whereas the Sami are able to move much further north and deal with it just fine. And the Sami are linguistically related to the Finns, the Estonians, and the Hungarians. So there's this weird, what's happening in this territory here? Well, here you have Slavic, and then here you have the Baltic languages. But otherwise we have this stretch of what appears like a straight line of Uralic. And the Baltic languages are right in line with that. And if you really look at the Baltic languages, they don't necessarily look Indo-European when you look really closely. So I'm not strongly in favor of the Balto-Slavic family. I'm not convinced that that's valid. Over here, so Germanic moved up into this territory relatively recently. We have Germanic first really attested down here about 1700 years ago. 1700 years ago. It's really not that long ago, right? We have Latin attested about twice as long ago. And we have Greek attested about 3 times as long ago. Something on that sort of timescale. So we sort of can see, if we look at this, we can sort of see a progression of how things were growing here. And the Germanic languages down here, including German, are pretty heavily influenced by Latin, which makes sense. The Celtic languages are very heavily influenced by Latin, which makes sense. Yeah, so it kind of looks to me like Germanic probably moved up this way in an arch. The Slavs, I'm not sure what was going on there at all, but I do think that their origin is down in the south. And if you look at oral history, you have the Czechs, the Poles, and the Russians all have stories about coming from the south, and the Poles will say, yeah, we came from the south, and the Czechs stayed behind. We broke off from the Czechs. And the Russians will say, the Russian story says, yeah, we came from the south, and the Czechs stayed behind, and then the Poles stayed behind, and then, I'm not sure why I keep pointing to this. Yeah, Czechia and Slovakia. I don't know. I don't know all of these countries just by the sight of them. Yeah, so the Czechs stayed behind, and the Poles stayed behind, and then there was us. So if you look at the oral history, there's really good evidence here that what happened was that they moved this way. And also, if you look at the diversity, there's really good evidence that they moved this way. And if you look at what appears to be the origin point of Indo-European, just based on what everything else is pointing to, it looks like they moved this way. Like, I don't understand why the sort of mainstream view is that they started here and moved this way. Like, it's backwards. It makes no sense. And then there's other problems, right? Like basic terminology, basic vocabulary, right? Say, for instance, house. Words for house, right? So, most of the Slavic languages have something like dom, which is also occurs in Latin. It might be from Latin. Greek has something like, it has a few of them. It has like, I think stub and oikia. I could be misremembering that, but like oikia. I don't know how you pronounce it. I don't speak Greek, but that's a very different sort of word, right? And I think, what is it? Macedonian and Slovenian have like koka, which is weird. Okay, that's different. And most of Germanic, extant Germanic, has something like house or hus. And it's been classically argued that this term was originally, the original Germanic term for house was hus, and that in English the vowel changed to house as part of the Great Vowel Shift. There's a problem with that, and that is that German also has this vowel. It has house, and Dutch has huis, as does Afrikaans, and like these are, so Afrikaans is derived from Dutch, but also it's a Yiddish word for houses, huis. So that's interesting. The simple vowel, the hus claim, is interesting because it doesn't actually make any sense. Also, when we look at the oldest extant Germanic language that we have any evidence for, the word for house is nothing like this, and I can show it to you right here. So this is this is actually the first line of what we have of the Ulfila Bible, written by, as I mentioned, Ulfilas, who was of Cappadonian Greek heritage, and his parents were taken as slaves, abducted by Goths in what is now southern Romania, and he later became a missionary and a priest or something. And he wrote down in Gothic a translation of the Bible, right? So here, this is the Gothic word for house, garda, right? This is, you can almost read this in English. Yauluteth alem themin thama garda, and lit up all of them in their house. And it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Yeah, like, this is house, garda. It's not hus, it's nothing like that. It's garda, which, if we go back to the map, that actually looks like words from over here, right? So this is Mongolia, and the Mongolian word for a house is gur. Why do we have a word that sounds like gur for house here and here? That's interesting. Also, this is our oldest example of a Germanic language, and it doesn't have the Germanic word for house. That's interesting. And up until about 10 years ago, whenever I would look this up, I would see claims that the original, the old school archaic word for house in Germanic was hus. But I made such a stink about this, and I pointed out this original source to so many linguists that it's actually hard to find that claim on the internet anymore. I'm sure you still can, but it's much more difficult than it was about a decade ago. And this coincided very strongly with me just shouting at everybody, like, what the hell are you doing about this? So I don't know that it's changed because of me, but it's interestingly coincidental with that. And nobody will give me credit for it. But a lot of linguists I have personally spoken to and said, hey motherfucker, why are you saying this when you can just look at Wilfila's Bible and see that this claim is nonsense? Your first actual attested text does not have hus or house or anything like that as the Germanic word for house. What is happening? What are you doing? Yeah, so I have lots of problems with this. And one of them, another one is that the entire concept of Indo-European as a language family, as these are all interrelated to each other and descended from a common ancestor language, it all stems from identification by a monk that there were similarities here in, I think it was the 1600s, maybe the 1700s, but it was quite a long time ago, many centuries ago. And he identified them with the descendants of Japheth, who was one of the three sons of Noah in Genesis, in the Bible. And so, for a long time, Indo-European was referred to as Japhethite. And another related, the Semitic languages were identified as stemming from the descendants of Shem, something like that. One of Noah's other sons, and then there was Hamitic, which is now been abandoned by linguists. But it's notable here that none of these three groups, two of them are only kind of valid. Right? Indo-European is kind of valid, Semitic is kind of valid, but Semitic is part of a larger group, Afro-Asiatic, so it's not really the full group itself. And Indo-European has problems, and the third one, Hamitic, we just abandoned it. It's no. We finally just recognized, no, that's not good. But the reason that Indo-European, I think, this is an opinion now, but it is based in a lot of evidence, I think the reason that it is held on very well is because it is the language group spoken by the dominant ethnic majority around that has the power in the wealthiest countries. So you have sort of a racist bias here, and this is absolutely, like, in many cases, this is undeniable that this is occurring. But it's also notable if you look at it. If you look at, like, all of the language families in the world, which one is the biggest? Which one has the most languages included in it? Which one has the most geographical territory included with it? It's Indo-European. That's interesting. That totally couldn't possibly be related to white supremacy. Yeah. And really, when you look at it, there's problems with it. So, I personally think that these two branches, Germanic and Slavic, aren't actually descended from, like, Hittite or something related to it. These other guys I'm less sure about, but the fact that you have Latin and Greek splitting off quite early and in pretty close in time to each other, but they're radically different from each other. They're actually more similar now than they were then. Is interesting. What happened there? How do you get such a radical difference so quickly? And then, like, it kind of comes back together, like, more similar. Yeah, it's weird. Whereas, like, Slavic is allegedly also about that same age, but internally it's experienced comparatively very little shifts. And Germanic is allegedly that old, but nothing about it looks like it could possibly be that old. And where there's definitely some major changes occurring after this first thing is found, because, yeah, it's just strange. It doesn't make sense, the standard narrative. So I kind of think, like, Germanic is perhaps, very possibly, the descendant, the progeny of maybe a Creole that formed. And a similar thing might be occurring with Slavic, because you do have, all throughout Indo-European, you have lots of Semitic borrowings for sure, and these are often taken to be, like, core vocabulary. But you get more of them in Germanic and Slavic than you do, and different ones, but they're shared between Germanic and Slavic a lot of times, and different ones than you'd get from in the other branches. So that's interesting. One of them being the Slavic word for city, which is notably probably a cognate with the Gothic word for house, right? So the Slavic word for city, sort of the pan-Slavic word for city, is like grad, or in Russian maybe gorod. If you look at the consonants, right, if you kind of view this in, like, a Semitic linguistics sort of perspective, and so we're looking at the consonants, and we're looking particularly for triliterals, so a cluster of 3 consonants, and then you can kind of drop vowels in between them or around them, sort of depending on what we're doing, how we're deriving the root into a pronounceable word. They have exactly the same triliteral root, GRD. And this root actually shows up in Phoenician, particularly in this region. This region of the Phoenician area of influence was known as Carthage. And that name, Carthage, the root word there is, its triliteral is Qa-R-T, Qarat, Carthage, and it refers to the cities that they made. This word, karat, or kart, means city, and it also means city in Slavic. That word was not picked up by Latin, it was not picked up by Greek, I don't know about Albanian, so it's interesting that was picked up by Slavic. If Slavic started up here and came down much later, how the hell could that have even happened? How is that even possible? But if Slavic was down here all along, and then spread much later, suddenly it makes a lot more sense because you're proximate to the Phoenician region of influence. This vocabulary can come in much more easily. If they're up here, that can't. How does that happen? What mechanism causes that to happen? I don't know. You tell me. For me, yeah, look at it. Like, if you have grad is city and garda is house, one is Germanic and one is Slavic. That looks like a relationship. That looks a lot like a relationship. And it's a strange relationship because it's not one that you see anywhere else across Indo-European. It's really only occurring in Slavic and Germanic. And there's a lot of these. I don't have a list made up or anything right now. But there's a lot of these. Another one that I can think of offhand is the word for small. Right. So if we go to, let's say we go to Google Translate, and I'll just show you. So here's the English word small. Let's go to Russian. Here, let's pull this one. So there's a whole bunch of. So this root right here, it's the same root. English just has an S on the front of it. You see these all the time. Right? So like a bull, steer. If we go into Greek, there you go. There's the same root, but English has an S on it. So this is bull, this is, whatever. So Taurus. There it is. And there's other ones, like this is a, consider these two words, stable and table. So ignore the Greek right now, I'm not interested in that. I'm just writing these words here. Stable and table, or ton and stone. Right? There's a whole bunch of these. The S is probably some old grammatical thing that we just kind of lost. We don't use it anymore. It's not productive anymore. It doesn't do anything anymore. So we don't. But it's just kind of like frozen onto some words, and it's not on other words. But you can still see that we're working with the same roots. So a ton is a lot of weight, and a stone is an object that has a lot of weight. It's the same root, right? Or a table is a firm place where you can work, you can put things, and something that's stable is something that's firm, that doesn't move. It's the same root, and between Germanic and Slavic, you get some of these relationships that you don't get in other branches of Indo-European, like small versus Mali. So, yeah, there's some things going on here that I just question whether it's really, whether the family, all of the branches of the family are actually descended from a single common ancestor, or if some of the branches are actually probably representative of the descendants of some Creoles that occurred. I think that's fairly likely, and it's not a very well considered possibility. And I also sort of suspect that things along those lines also occurred with other language families like Sino-Tibetan. Sino-Tibetan feels too large and diverse to me as well, and kind of for the same reasons. When you really look into it, like, there's too much variety there, and it's the wrong kind of variety. Yeah, so it's a little bit of my take on Indo-European there.